Shalom, shalom. This is Brother Mathathawah from House of Israel, HOI New York City, coming to teach you a very edifying lesson today. All right, I came upon some information I've been wanting to bring out for a long time, and this is basically the studying of skulls. All right, we're going to find out today who the ancestors of the Negro race, what they call the Negroes, African Americans, all right, Caribbean Islanders. We're going to study through anthropology or the study of skulls who our ancestors were before slavery. All right. Now, a lot of people don't go this deep into European science because, of course, this is a European science to study racial classification based off cranial structure. All right. But it's still a method that's used today to even determine the sex of a skeletal remain, whether a skeleton was a male or a female. So they use this science called cephalic index, studying the cephalic index of a skull. All right, we're going to read from a couple sources. It's not going to be too long of a lesson, about 15, 20 minutes. All right, so I just want to read a little bit of the first maybe two sentences and then jump down in this page, right? It says cephalic index, the percentage of breadth to length in any skull. So cephalic index is just the measurement of a skull, right? The index is calculated from measurement of the diameters of a skull. That's what this science is, the measurements of a skull. And they determine the measurements of that skull will determine racial classification. This is what Europeans have been using for hundreds of years to study the skulls of our ancestors when they came and enslaved us, when they took us from the coast of Africa, when they dug up ancient civilizations in Egypt. All right, they dig up the skeletal remains and they do this science, measure the cephalic index to determine the sex and to determine the racial classification of that skeletal remain of that civilization that they have excavated. This is very important because we're going through this history based on the Negro people that were taken from West Africa into the Americas, the Caribbean islands. This is some sources to identify where our origin is. And we're going to go through this short amount of sources. All right. So bear with me, y'all. Let's jump down in this page. All right. Let's jump down. Let's read that. An index is less than 75. An index of less than 75 means that the skull is long and narrow when seen from the top. Such skulls are called dolichocephalic. All right. Remember that term, everybody. Dolichocephalic. And are typical of Australian Aborigines and native Southern Africans. So these dolichocephalic skulls represent black people. Australian Aborigines are very, very dark skinned. Native Southern Africans, those are what you call Bantu Negroes. All right, we know that that's a generalized term, Bantu, because Bantu people are spread out throughout all the continent of Africa. They're everywhere. North Africa, West, East. Bantu Africans are all over the continent. They're not just subjected to South Africa. Right? Let's continue to read. An index of 75 to 80 means that the skull is nearly oval. Such skulls are called mesaticephalic and are typical of Europeans and the Chinese. All right, so let's understand this. If I was to go into an ancient civilization in the Middle East, and I was able to dig up skeletal remains that were mesaticephalic, those would be identical to European skeletal remains of the Americas, of Poland, Switzerland, Russia. If I dug up a skeletal remain in Russia, the cephalic index would be a mesaticephalic skull, right? So if I was to go to China, these skulls would be the same. And I would be able to trace what civilization these people migrated from and trace the migration patterns of a people. Same thing with the Negroes. All right. The Negroes have dolichocephalic skulls. And if we dug up a civilization in Africa, right, let's say the ancient African civilization of the Sudan, where there were pyramids, and we dug up some skeletal remains, and they were dolichocephalic, which match skeletal remains of Negroes in Jamaica, in Haiti, all right, in the Middle East, we would be able to track the migration patterns of these people. So this science is important. Even though Europeans made up this science is very important. All right, let's continue to read. A skull having an index of over 80 is broad and short and is called brachycephalic. Such skulls are common among Mongolians and Andaman Islanders. Okay, so this is Britannica.com. All right, if you want to check the source, let's get another source. All right, this is from Theodora.com. Dolichocephalic. Dolichocephaly, according to Retsuis, was the distinctive cranial feature of the earliest inhabitants of Europe. So this is important, y'all, because now these European scientists are saying that the skeletal remains that they're digging up in Europe have dolichocephalic skulls. And we read in the previous source of Britannica that the Negroes, right, the Aboriginal Australians, who are a dark-skinned people, and native Southern Africans, which are Bantu Negroes, what they call Bantu Negroes. These people, these skeletal remains were also found in Europe. So what does that mean? That means that you can trace a migration pattern of these dark-skinned Negro people where they once inhabited. This is important. All right. It says they were the earliest inhabitants of Europe. This is before even Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire, when they migrated into Europe and was taking over the area. This is before that. This is ancient. All right. Today is the characteristic of the Negro races. Look at that. You can't make this up. Of the Papuans. Sorry if I'm butchering the words. But the Papuans, let's see what these Papuans look like. All right. Let's get a source. Let's see what the Papuan tribe look like. Look at this. These people are letting you know that the earliest inhabitants of Europe, right, had dolichocephalic skulls, and it represents the Negro races, such as the Papuans. Look how dark-skinned these people are. All right. These people are a dark black people. All right. A dark black people, such as the Papuans. Kinky hair, what they call nappy hair. All right. And who else? It says the Papuans, the Polynesians. All right. Your Polynesians would be like your Samoans. Right. I think The Rock, his family is from Samoa. I think he's a Samoan, I believe. And the Australians, which we just read before, the Aboriginal Australians. Let's see what they look like. Aboriginal Australia. You see how dark these people are? So if you represent these people groups, these are melanated people. Some of them have woolly hair and some of them have straight hair. The Aboriginal Australians have straight hair, but the Papuans had woolly hair. So these people are just melanated, Negroid people, black people. All right. And this is important to understand for dolichocephalic skulls. All right. We're going to jump straight into our next source. All right. We're going to read Hebrewisms of West Africa by Joseph J. Williams. This is an excellent book, y'all. Hebrewisms of West Africa, from the Nile to the Niger with the Jews. Now let's see something. Page 28 in Hebrewisms of West Africa, it says, that carries us well on our way to the verification of the assertion of Andre Archin, already quoted, that the Ashanti, this is the subject matter, the Ashanti people, the Ashanti tribe in West Africa, which is modern day Ghana, Nigeria, those were the lands of the Ashanti. The Ashanti may trace their descent from distant Egypt. How do they know that the Ashanti migrated from Upper Egypt into West Africa? Because they have studied the skeletal remains of the people that they have enslaved. The Ashanti are a part of the transatlantic slave trade. The Ashanti, the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Ewe, okay, the Fan, the Fulani, the Soninke, all of these West African tribes are a part of one family group, I might add, but they are able to study the skeletal remains of the people that they have enslaved. And they can go to these different lands and dig up their skeletal remains and say, these same Negro skeletons, these dolichocephalic skulls, are also in Upper Egypt. So these people must have migrated from Egypt into West Africa. All right, now let's continue to read. Professor Roland B. Dixon of Harvard, as we shall see, is of the opinion that the oldest strata in Africa are represented by the Mongoloid, that is round-headed brachycephalic. So he's saying that the oldest Africans are brachycephalic skulls. All right, you'll also find out that these brachycephalic skulls also are a Negroid people as well. All right, all black people are not the same. We all descend from different ancestors, and the skeletal structures will show you that there are different lineages of black people upon the planet. All right, the Bible verifies that with the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right, so these brachycephalic skulls are the earliest inhabitants of Africa. Okay, low-skulled, chamaecephalic, broad-nosed platyrrhine, and the proto-australoid, that is long-headed dolichocephalic. We just read about that, and we saw what the australoid looked like. These black Negro people, right? Low-skulled, chamaecephalic, broad-nosed platyrrhine types. Speaking of the latter classification being the dolichocephalic, platyrrhine. That's the latter classifications that they're speaking of. Professor Dixon calls attention to the fact that this type appears as a not inconsiderable element in the Abyssinian Plateau, which is East Africa, and among the Ashanti of West Africa. So the Ashanti of West Africa, they also have dolichocephalic skulls. Keep in mind, we read, according to different anthropologists, that the earliest inhabitants of Europe had dolichocephalic skulls as well. Why is this important? This is very important. Keep walking with me. We're going to see why this is important. All right. The next page reads, again, according to Professor Dixon, among the Ashanti, the brachycephalic pygmy type forms less than 10%. All right. So amongst the Ashanti of West Africa, the Negroes that were taken into the Americas, less than 10% of this tribe, these are millions of people, by the way. Millions of people represent the tribe of the Akan and the Ashanti. Or the I forgot the other name of the Ashanti. Fanti, I think it's the Fanti as well. You have the Fanti, the Akan, and the Ashanti, which is one people group that broke off into 3 separate tribes. The Ashanti, only less than 10% represent brachycephalic skulls, while more than half belong to what he terms the proto-Negroid type, that is dolicephalic, platyrrhine with high skull, medium broad face, and moderate prognathism. Okay? So 90% of the population of the Ashanti have dolichocephalic skulls. All right? It is further his opinion that the earliest population, or the early population of the Guinea Coast, that's West Africa region, was closely comparable to that of the Congo forest. That is a brachycephalic pygmy type. And that these have been overlaid. So these brachycephalic skulls have been overlaid or conquered by a strong immigration. This is a migration of typical Negroes, dolichocephalic platyrrhine. So now they're saying that these brachycephalic skulls, or these Negro people that first inhabited West Africa, they have been overlaid and conquered by a strong migration of typical Negroes, that's what they call in the Ashanti, typical Negroes, the dolichocephalic type, with medium broad faces and moderate prognathism, in which the high skulls greatly outnumbered the low skulls. This Negro migration, he adds, was in part a westerly drift from the Chad-Nile area. So now they're identifying the regions in which these Negro people have migrated from. How? Through the study of their skeletal remains. And in part a direction southward movement from the Western Sudan and the Sahara borders, forced by the expansion in the Sahara region of the Caspian peoples who have poured into Northern Africa since very early times. All right, don't lose me, y'all. Continue to welcome. It's going to get good. Formerly subdirector to the Société, I don't know how to say, d'Anthropologie de Lyon in 1919, says of the Ashanti, the marks of variability indicated by the stature, cephalic index, and nasal index shows us only that the Ashanti do not constitute a pure ethnic group, right? So like I said, the Ashanti is just a portion of the ethnic group that they come from. The Akan, the Fanti, and the Ashanti are all one people. And other tribes, the Igbo are also the same people as the Ashanti. They just separated into various tribes. All right. They appear to be, whatever future studies may show, an aggregate of Negro types. So they're just one of many Negro types of these Bantu peoples. They assuredly classify as a people of tall stature, height above the medium, and tall stature, for the most part, dolichocephals or subdolichocephals and platyrrhine. All right. So just to show you that these West African people, these Ashanti, and also its various other tribes that have these dolichocephalic skulls, like the Igbo, the Hausa, the Yoruba, etc., they are also classified as dolichocephalic. All right, Negro, proto-Negro type, which is what they said. All right, now that brings us to our next source. All right, The Earth and Its Inhabitants, Africa, by Elise Recluse. All right, published in 1888. Page 267. Dahomey. So if you understand anything about West African geography, you'll understand that the ancient kingdom of Dahomey was also at war with the people of the Ashanti. All right, the kingdom of Dahomey, which is a variety of tribes. You had the Fan, you had the Aja people. Dahomey is the kingdom, and there were various tribes that were within the kingdom of Dahomey. The Aja people were the ruling class, but the Aja were conquering and going to war with the Ashanti and the Akan and the Fanti. All right, so let's read this source. East of Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important towns of Gliwe, known to the Europeans by the various names of Fida, Havida, Wida. The old writers call it Judah. And its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name Ephra, became the Euphrates. So now these early European writers are letting you know that the inhabitants of these West African countries, specifically the Dahomey territory, which covers Guinea, all right, these inhabitants are said to be Jews. And their main port of the slave port of the Gold Coast, in which the Ashanti were sold, they were sold from this port that was called Wida or Judah. They were sold from this very port. And the French writers are letting you know that the inhabitants of this land were said to be Jews. All right, let's go to our next source. All right, the quarterly magazine, The Monist, published in 1896. All right. Page 386, it says, and it reads, anthropologists are accustomed to divide it into two parts, well distinguished. The dolichocephalic, there goes that word again. There goes that word again. The dolichocephalic and brachycephalic. To the first type belonging the Sephardim Jews. So the first type is what? The dolichocephalic. The source says to the first type belongs the Sephardim Jews and the Spanish and Portuguese Jews. Even the larger part of the Jews of Italy and southern France. So there are Jews that live in Italy, live in France, in Europe. Now we're tying the sources together because the earlier source stated that these dolichocephalic skulls are upon the earliest inhabitants of Europe. And now you're reading another source that verifies that there were Jews that have dolichocephalic skulls. But the anthropologists are letting you know that dolichocephaly is a representation of Negro people. All right, let's go back to that. I don't want y'all to forget that, man. Let's go back to that. Dolichocephaly, according to Red Suisse, was a distinctive cranial feature of the earliest inhabitants of Europe. Today, it is a characteristic of the Negro races. So dolichocephaly is a characteristic of Negro people. Anthropologists are accustomed to divide it into two parts well distinguished, the dolichocephalic and the brachycephalic. All right. The earliest source also read, when we read the book about the Ashanti, the previous source said the earliest inhabitants of Africa were brachycephalic. Oh, it's getting good. Right? Dolichocephalic and brachycephalic to the first type, which is dolichocephalic, belonging to the Sephardim Jews and the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, even the larger part of the Jews of Italy and southern France. So now you're understanding that the Jews that lived in Spain and Portugal during the medieval times, these Jews had dolichocephalic skulls as well. And modern anthropologists would classify these dolichocephalic skulls as Negro skulls, skulls of people with melanin, dark pigmentation of skin. Let's continue to read. To the second belonging the Ashkenazim Jews. That is to say the Polish, Russian, and German Jews. All right. So dolichocephalic would represent Negro people. And it's the sources are saying that the Portuguese and the Spanish Jews are Negroes, according to the cranial structures, right? Let's read the next source. The Jews, A Study of Race and Environment by Maurice Fishberg, 1911. All right, page 47. All right, let me zoom in a little bit. Right, the head forms, skulls of ancient Hebrews of medieval Jews. The oldest Jewish skulls examined are those reported by C. Lombroso. They were found in the catacomb of St. Calixtus in Rome. So now they're going to ancient skulls of Jews that were found in Rome and are of great scientific interest. All right, now let's jump down and see what it says about these skulls that were found in Rome. Of the 5 skulls thus examined, 3 were distinctly dolichocephalic. 3 of those skulls of the Jews in Rome were dolichocephalic skulls. Their cranial indicates being 75.1, 76.1. One was mesocephalic, right, with a cranial index of 80, and one brachycephalic with an index of 83.4. All right, remember what the description of mesocephalic was in our early source. For those that have forgot, let's go back to it. Right, for those that forgot what mesocephalic represented, let's go back to our first source. Right, this right here. right? An index of 75 to 80 means that the skull is nearly oval. Such skulls are called mesocephalic or mesocephalic and are typical of Europeans and Chinese, right? When you read up again, dolichocephalic are typical of Australian Aborigines and native Southern Africans. This is Britannica.com, y'all. Right? Now we go back to our book source. They're saying that these ancient Israelite skulls that were discovered in Rome, 3 of them were dolichocephalic. The same skulls of Bantu Africans. Their cranial indicates, right? One was mesocephalic with a cranial index of 80 and one brachycephalic. Okay, so you had one European mesocephalic. Brachycephalic, like I said before, can represent dark-skinned people as well, right? Because one of the anthropologists also said that the earliest inhabitants of Africa were brachycephalic people, and that these dolichocephalic Ashanti came and conquered those people or mingled amongst them, right? Let's go to the next page. Of the other skulls investigated, it appears that most of those derived from Sephardim or Spanish and Portuguese Jews are dolichocephalic. This is a secondary source to let you know that these Spanish and Portuguese Jews have dolichocephalic skulls, and that indicates that these people are Negro. It indicates that these people are black people, these ancient Jews of antiquity. See, y'all think we lying when we tell y'all that the blacks or these West African people, just like the Ashanti were designated with dolichocephalic skulls, that your ancestors are the Jews. You're literally seeing it within the sources. You read a source that said the Ashanti had dolichocephalic skulls. We went to the anthropologists of their definition of dolichocephalic and what it indicates. And it said that it indicates Southern African people and Aboriginal Australians, Negro types. All right. Let's continue to read the source. Right. The most, Salakia, of the other skulls investigated, it appears that the most of these derive from Sephardim or Spanish and Portuguese Jews are dolichocephalic. Particularly in this, the case with those from North Africa and Turkey, and examined by Pruner Bay, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Eichhoff, Davis, etc. The few skulls of Polish and German Jews are either remember we read that the European people, their skulls represent mesocephalic skulls. The few skulls of Polish and German Jews are either meso or brachycephalic. But of course, the material is rather scanty. In Caucasia, they are extremely brachycephalic with a cephalic index of 85.2. All right, jumping down. Taking the other extreme of head form, dolichocephaly, we find that the Jews living in Yemen, Arabia, Morocco, Algeria, Tunis are of this type. So even the Jews that were living in the Middle East, in Yemen, in Arabia, in North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunis are of this type of dolichocephaly. Now, why is this important? Because we're reading a source that tells you the Jews were living in North Africa. What did we just read about the Ashanti? On page 28. It says that carries us well on our way to the verification of the assertion of Andre Archin, already quoted, that the Ashanti may trace their descent from distant Egypt. So it's letting you know that these people with dolichocephalic skulls migrated from North Africa. These Jews that were in Arabia, North Africa, migrated into the interiors of Western Africa. All right. Let's go back to that. Matter of fact, let's actually jump to a source about the Jews living in Yemen, Arabia, Morocco. I want to show you guys a little something. All right. When you type in Jews of Balad el Sudan, I know we don't use Wikipedia for first-hand sources, but of course we cross-reference information with Wikipedia. Wikipedia has good information, but that's why you have to cross-reference the information with other verified sources to make sure your information is correct. All right. Jews of Balad el Sudan describes West African Jewish communities, which were connected to known Jewish communities which were expelled from the Middle East. So there were Israelite communities or Jews that were expelled from the Middle East from North Africa. They were expelled from North Africa, which would tie into the history of the Ashanti migrating from the lands of Upper Egypt. Or Spain and Portugal, the Jews of Spain and Portugal were expelled as well and migrated to West Africa. They migrated. They weren't always there. The Jews migrated from North Africa into the interiors of West Africa. The people that were taken on the transatlantic slave trade were not always inhabited in the lands of Western Africa. They weren't always in Mali. They weren't always in Sierra Leone. They weren't always in Ghana and Nigeria. All right, in Angola. They were not always there. They migrated further from the north into the west and south of Africa. All right. And this is verified by the plenty sources that we're bringing out based on skeletal structures. You can literally trace the migration of a people by studying the skeletal structures of these people to understand the migration patterns. Right. So it says these Jews were expelled from the Middle East, North Africa, or Spain and Portugal and migrated to West Africa. Various historical records state that at one time, these Jews were present in Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires, which was then called the Balad al-Sudan, a name which is derived from Arabic, which means land of the blacks. In later years, Jews who were expelled from Spain, Portugal, and Morocco and migrated to West Africa also formed their own communities off the coast of Senegal, as well on the coast of Cape Verde. These Jewish communities continued to exist for hundreds of years, and they eventually disappeared as a result of changing social conditions. What's those changing social conditions? The rise of Islam, the rise of Christianity when the Portuguese infiltrated the coast of West Africa, instituted by Pope Alexander VI of Rome, and various other popes, which allowed the Portuguese to infiltrate the interiors of Western Africa and Guinea. So these are the changing of social conditions that we're talking about. Persecutions, migrations, and assimilations. And even there were other Jews that assimilated into the Aboriginal people of Africa. They took on their customs and started practicing various witchcrafts and various other things to assimilate into the culture, but based on fear of persecution. All right, so this is what you're reading. All right, let's jump down to early history, right? All right, according to certain local Malian legends, an account in the Tariq al-Sudan. The Tariq al-Sudan is a 10th century document from Arab historians, may have recorded the first Israelite or Jewish presence in Western Africa, which coincide with the arrival of the first Zua ruler, Kukuya, and his brother who settled near the Niger River. He was only known as Zua Alayaman, which means he that comes from Yemen. What did we read in the previous source about the Jews that lived in Yemen? Right, let's go to it. At the bottom of the page. Taking other extreme of head form, dolichocephaly, which represents what people? Negro races. We find that the Jews living in Yemen, Arabia, Morocco, Algeria, that's Northern Africa, and Tunis are of this type. They are Bantu Negroes. All right? Bantu Negroes. All right, this is how you know this information is correct. Even though it's on Wikipedia, we're cross-referencing this information. He was also known as Zua Alayaman. He comes from Yemen. Some local legends state that Zua Alayaman was a member of one of the Jewish or Israelite communities, which were either transported or voluntarily moved from Yemen by the Ethiopians in the 6th century. So they came into Western Africa in the 6th century. Y'all know how long ago that? The 6th century. This is before Islam even came into Western Africa. Before it got a chance to penetrate the interiors of Africa, the Jews were migrating from Yemen. These dolichocephalic Bantu Negroes that are called Jews migrated into Western Africa and established empires. All right? In the 6th century, after the defeat of Dunawas. All right? So let's go to another source. We're going to keep bringing them out. We're going to go to this source called The Scattered Nation. All right? Edited by C. Swartz, 1866. All of our books are going to be from the 1800s, early 1900s, because they had no problem putting the truth in the scholarship. You just have to find the information. It's here. All right, let's read about the Jews of Spain and Portugal, because we read earlier that the Jews of Spain and Portugal also had dolichocephalic skulls. They also were Bantu Negroes, or Negroid type people based on their skeletal remain, their skeletal structure, the cephalic index. All right, page 6. Let's zoom in because people may not be able to read that. It says, but to come to rabbinical authors, Abarbanel, in his commentary on Zechariah 12, verse 7, the Lord also shall save the tents of Judah, affirms that at the desolation of the first temple, 2 families of the house of David came and settled in Spain, one at Lucena, the other, the Abarbanels, at Seville. And from those Jews came 1,000 offshoots. So we're reading in the sources that the families of King David himself came to settle in Spain. But we read in the other sources that the Jews of Spain and Portugal have dolichocephalic skulls, which means they also are Bantu Negroes. So King David and his descendants would be what, y'all? King David and the Jews would be what? Jesus Christ's descendants would be what, y'all? According to the anthropologists and the various sources that we're going through. That means that they would be a Negro people, dark-skinned people that look like the Ashanti, because the Ashanti had the same Negroid skeletal structure, and their migration patterns match the same migration patterns of the Jews, because that's who they are. That's who they are. These various tribes that were taken into slavery in Western Africa, like we read in the Dahomey source, it says that the inhabitants were said to be Jews, and the port was called Judah in the Dahomey kingdom. So now we're reading about the families of King David being sent into Spain. And from those, the lineage of King David, came thousands of offshoots. Right? Let's read this. Conversation in the 13th century between a philosopher named Thomas and King Alonso, whence we may learn, if we can believe it, that a king of Spain who assisted Nebuchadnezzar, all right, that's the king of Babylon, in reducing Jerusalem, brought an enormous population into Spain. So there was a king who helped Nebuchadnezzar destroy Jerusalem and brought an enormous population of Jews into Spain, all from either the family of King David or at least from the tribe of Judah. At least they're Jews. And that the royal family resided first in Seville, then in Granada. Adding that the exiles afterwards had their numbers greatly increased by the fugitives from the desolation of the Second Temple. When is the Second Temple destroyed? Upon the Roman desolation of Jerusalem in 70 AD. When the Romans destroyed the temple, those are Europeans. The Romans are Europeans. When they destroyed Jerusalem, there was a mass exodus of Jews that fled into northern Africa, a mass exodus of Jews that went into Spain and Portugal because the lineage of King David was residing in Spain and Portugal. And these people are said to have dolichocephalic skulls, and today it is distinctly a description of Negro people. I'm going to continue to repeat that because according to the science that we have today, this is important, man. This is all important. And this information, you cannot get around this information. All right, so that wraps up our sources. But let's take a look right here, right? I want to bring you to some archaeology. All right, this is called the Lachish Relief. This is the BritishMuseum.org. All right, the Lachish Relief is an Assyrian relief of when the Assyrians came to conquer the city of Judah, which is called Lachish. And they took some of the Jews captives and they celebrated and made a monument, right, which is called the Lachish Relief. These are the Assyrian people right here. All right, let's keep going through it. We're going to show you what the Jews look like according to the archaeology. Now let's look at this. This is a photo or a carving, an archaeological find of the Jews, right? These people that they said have dolichocephalic skulls. All right. These people have nappy hair. Look at their hair type. All right. This is the truth of the Jews. This is the truth about who the Jews are on the planet today. You Negro people, what they call Negroes in the Americas that were taken captive. Your ancestors are the Jews of the Bible. Also, you Hispanics and you Native Americans descend from the other 10 tribes that were also taken captive into the Americas. That's another lesson in itself. But we're covering the Jews today, the Negroes. That's what we're covering right now, the Jews. And this is what they look like, according to antiquity. All right. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the lesson, y'all. I know it's been overwhelming with a lot of information. Go back and rewatch this lesson. Go back and take the sources from this lesson and study this. Learn what dolichocephalic means. Learn how it's applied. Learn the science that they use to determine the races of skeletal remains in which Europeans were studying these ancient civilizations. Because you'll find out that the ancestors of the so-called West Africans, that their ancestors are actually the Jews that were expelled from Spain and Portugal, from Arabia, and who migrated from Northern Africa into the interiors of Western Africa and were captured by the Europeans, the Arabs, and those native Africans that rounded them up upon the decree of Pope Alexander VI of Rome. All right. So I hope this was an edifying lesson for you guys. All right. If you guys need any information, any other sources, be sure to hit me up. All right. This is Brother Mathathawah again out of HOI House of Israel, New York. Shalom.